Hi, class. Welcome to this lecture on Christian Europe, Part 2. Today, we're going to be talking about a time period that is probably one of the most incredible 500 years in Christian history, from the Great Schism of 1054 to the Council of Trent in 1563. The kind of things that were happening during this time period are fairly unprecedented. I guess you could say that about any time period. But as you can see on the map, the Great Schism of 1054, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, really divided what we're calling Christian Europe, into East and West. And the red here is the West. And North Africa is part of the Western Church because they were all Latin speaking. And the scholars who wrote in Latin. So Tertullian, Augustine, these are kind of the early Latin fathers from the first couple hundred centuries. But all the writers in this area would have been Latin, and the way they thought and wrote theologically was based on Latin. And then the purple is the Greek East, or the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's all Greek speaking, headquartered there in Constantinople. So all of Greece and Macedonia and the northern parts there, all of Turkey, Palestine, North Africa from Egypt over to where the line goes to red. These aren't hard lines either. There's a lot of kind of, it's more of a spectrum than this map gives credit for it. But that's kind of the basic breakdown. One's headquartered in Rome, one's headquartered in Constantinople. But at the same time, from the 6th to 11th century is the rise of Islam. And this is incredibly important for the growth of Christianity because Islam prevented a lot of the growth of Christianity moving east. The Prophet Muhammad, was born in 571 in Mecca. He was born to a wealthy family of merchants, and they were pagan, like everybody else in that area. But Muhammad was known for being ethical, and he was deeply influenced by Judaism. A lot of the Jews had, left Palestine all the way back from the Roman period and migrated in the diaspora towards the east. Some were still in Babylon even after the Persians took Babylon and allowed them to go back. A lot of the aristocratic Jews stayed. So Judaism had been in the middle, the Persia and the Arabian Peninsula for hundreds of years. And this was the kind of Judaism, this monotheistic religion that Muhammad engaged and found out about, and Zoroastrianism as well. But there's also a certain kind of Christianity. If you remember, we talked about the heresies of Christianity. Once Christianity started becoming more of a thing that had an authorizing group that said, this is what Christianity is, there were other parts that were cut out, and they were called heresies. Well, those heresies weren't allowed to be in the Roman Empire legally, so a lot of them left and went east. And one group was a group that had an idea that Jesus only had one nature, and that he was human and not divine. He had divine characteristics, but monophysite Christianity. Mono means one, physite means nature. We get physics, physis comes from it, physics, nature. So these Christians didn't believe that Jesus was divine, but certainly divinely inspired and a major prophet. And Muhammad didn't convert to Judaism or convert to Christianity, but he absolutely believed in one God. And there was a transformation that happened in Muhammad from paganism to this concept of one God. And he understood Jesus to be a major prophet. And to this day in Islam, Jesus is the second greatest prophet in all of Islam and Muhammad is the greatest prophet. And, no, and they don't believe that Muhammad is divine at all. There's only one God in Islam. So Muhammad is a man, and he was he's the greatest prophet of Islam, and Jesus is the second greatest. But it's because Muhammad was so influenced by this kind of Christianity and Judaism. Well, he also got his idea of proselytizing from Christianity, and so Islam from the very beginning was a proselytizing religion. Muhammad himself fought for conversion and converted a lot of people in his own area. So Islam rapidly spread throughout the Middle East during Muhammad's lifetime and after his death. And by the 11th century, it's a dominant religion in the East. And this is kind of the beginnings of the Islamic conquest. So this is happening in the Arabian Peninsula, moving into Persia, and also moving west into Byzantium, or Christian Byzantine, or the Greek East, or the Eastern Orthodox, whatever you want to call it. This is what's on the frontier with Islam. But in 1054, which is kind of our starting point for today in Christian purposes, I'll kind of reiterate some of this stuff. This is the official split between the Roman Catholic Church, which is headquartered in Rome, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is headquartered in Constantinople. And by all accounts, the Eastern Church is much stronger than the Western Church at this point. Constantinople had been the headquarter of the empire since Constantine, but with the rise of the power of the Pope in Rome, they kind of broke away. And this led to this Great Schism, and schism is like a split, basically. But Europe, by 1054, Europe was predominantly Christian, maybe not in the north, but certainly kind of in the southern part of Europe. It is dominantly Christian, and that Christianity is kind of moving north. And this was a major fight. The schism was really a major fight between the Pope, the power of the Pope in Rome, and the power of the Patriarch in Constantinople. So Rome had the Pope, and Constantinople had the Patriarch. And the Pope looked at his power from the apostolic lineage, as Peter being the first bishop of Rome, and the Pope saw that he had the authority that came directly from that apostolic lineage, and the Patriarch, they never claimed that wasn't the nature of the authority in Constantinople. But the Pope and the Patriarch were absolutely kind of who has more power, who has authorizing power, who has the capacity to determine what Christianity is, and things of that nature. So the kind of things theologically they disagreed with between Rome and Constantinople weren't actually that big. So the theological grounds was just part of the larger political power that these regions were kind of dealing with. And while this is happening between the East and the West, between Rome and Constantinople, Islam was conquering major territories in the eastern frontier of the Byzantine Empire. So as Rome was kind of exerting its authority over, or not over Constantinople, but in the face of Constantinople, and kind of claiming equal authority, or maybe even claiming more than that, Islam is on the eastern side of the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Orthodox Church, and they're kind of fighting from that side. So you get kind of rival Christianities and then rival religions, and the Byzantine Empire is right in the middle of that. And by the time this is over with, Islam will have taken Palestine, moved into most of North Africa, and most of modern Turkey. So Constantinople really loses, or the Byzantine Empire really gets decimated by the Islamic conquest in the East. And by the time the 16th century rolls around, Constantinople is basically a city surrounded by Islam. and really the only thing left of the Byzantine Empire and the Eastern Orthodox Church that came with it, because most of that area, once Islam conquered it, it was just like Christianity. It was like turn or become, convert or die. And Islam didn't create that; they borrowed that from Christians because that's what they had experienced in this next section, the beginning of the Crusades. So in this, not long after the Great Schism, Pope Urban II demanded that the Holy Land be retaken from Muslims. Now, he literally just kind of leapfrogs over Byzantine Christians or the Eastern Orthodox Christians. And as they marched through the Greek East, they annihilate Orthodox Christians as much as they annihilate Muslims. So it is a very Catholic thing. And as they go to the Holy Land, they kind of repent or die kind of thing, turn or die, had this same kind of proposition. So um, as the Catholic forces took these areas by force, coercion was part of mission, both theologically and practically. It was a convert or die scenario. So they would hold their swords at somebody's neck and tell them to be baptized. So either you converted or you were killed. And so Islam adopted this in a retaliation, which would come back and really be harmful for the Eastern Orthodox Church. So evangelism and missions was directly tied to violent conquest in the fight between European Christianity, Roman Catholicism in particular, and Islam. So before you get a European colonization, you already have intrinsically in the spread of Christianity violent conquest, and it certainly comes from the Crusades. But Crusades is just one part of the Christian mission. But this is an inextricable part of the spread of Christianity. So violent conquest was a major part of how Christianity grew and spread. So Eastern Orthodox / Byzantium, they actually created a buffer zone between Islam and Catholicism that actually helped Catholicism remain mostly in peace in Western Europe. So in Rome, in Spain, in kind of just north of Rome, just east of Rome, they didn't really have anybody fighting them in their hometowns. And that had everything to do with the fact that the Eastern Orthodox Church was fighting Islam on their Eastern Front. So they were protecting Roman Catholicism from this kind of crushing force on the Eastern Front. But at the same time, the Catholic Church wasn't just didn't have anything. They weren't just totally at peace, because on their western side in the water were the Vikings on the Western Front, and this is like Ericsson, one of the most famous Vikings in history. So in the West, the monks were spreading Christianity to the western part of the Christian Europe. So they were spreading Christianity to Britain and Scotland and Scandinavia. And they would set up monasteries. And so these monasteries became powerful places of education. That's where learning was happening in the Middle Ages. And this medieval period was a terrible time for education. So this was like the only places where education was happening. The people were still writing and reading, and they were teaching people how to read. But it was all around these monasteries. And so since it was a place of learning, locals, this is where they would bring the treasury. So the monasteries were kind of the place of wealth, and the Vikings knew this. So when the Vikings raided, came down from the northern Norway, northern Sweden, Denmark, when they came down on the western shores in their boats, they would go after the monasteries and raid the monasteries and take all the gold. But in doing this over a period of time, like 100 years, the Vikings, many of them ended up converting to Christianity as they kind of raided and looted monasteries. Some of them were actually converted, and as they were converted, they would take their new faith. Here on Erickson, you see this. He has a cross right on his chest. So they actually take their religion into the North Atlantic, and Iceland is certainly becomes a Viking island, and it's a Christian island. They get to Greenland, and Greenland is actually part of North America. So the first Christian born in North America didn't happen in kind of like Jonestown. This idea that the Europeans landed there and you know colonized that area or set up a colony there. It's actually in Greenland through the Vikings. So Christianity was spreading in real interesting forms, like in the Western frontier with Vikings, but it was also kind of caught up in a series of violence as well. So you move through that. At the same time, you got European monarchies becoming a thing. I mean, the medieval period was ruled mainly by oligarchies, but as those oligarchies kind of gave way, it turned into monarchies. And these monarchies, these royal families, started understanding themselves as the protectors of the church. And so they were very Catholic for sure, and they were kind of understood themselves as the leaders of the churches, and they would even appoint priests to administer the sacraments for their areas. Outside of that, they would set up standing armies and fight against invading barbarians or non-Christians. They would also really attempt to evangelize or convert all the people who lived in their territory or in their reign. And so monarchies in Europe, Western Europe in particular, become deeply rooted in the Catholic Church and understand themselves as protectorates of the church. So much so that the monarchies of Spain and Portugal, they end up fighting Islam that was kind of coming in from the south across the Mediterranean Sea. The Rock of Gibraltar is so close. You can see North Africa from the Rock of Gibraltar, the most southern tip of Europe. And so Islam had conquered all of North Africa and was coming into Europe over there. And the Moors had actually taken most of the southern part of the Iberian Peninsula outside of Portugal. And later on in the 16th century, King Ferdinand and Queen Elizabeth, the monarchs of Spain, they defeated the Muslims and pushed them back into North Africa. And when they did, it was the establishment of Spain. So they, both fought and protected the church. And the Kingdom of Portugal actually ended up expelling Muslims and Jews who wouldn't convert to Christianity during the same time period. So this kind of gives you an idea of how monarchy, the rise of monarchies and how they were tied into the Catholic Church, kind of the origins of what's becoming early modern Europe. And in an attempt to break a Muslim stronghold in Eastern Europe, which is all the way over to the old Byzantine Empire, the Portuguese prince Henry the Navigator, he died in 1460. He sends ships, and they have a strong navy, all the way around Africa, right? So he goes all the way down the west coast of Africa, into the Indian Ocean at the southern tip of Africa, and then kind of makes their way up Eastern Africa, and then kind of engages Islam there in the Middle East. He basically circumnavigates all of Africa, right? And all along the way, he's spreading Christianity because these guys are super Christian. And so Christianity is spread all the way down the west coast of Africa, then up the east coast of Africa. And truly, this really truly started the age of European exploration and conquest. And Christian mission was deeply ingrained in that exploration and conquest. And you notice, Henry the Navigator died in 1460, so this was even before the New World, right? I'm really reluctant to talk about the discovery, Christopher Columbus discovering the New World, because doctrines of discovery have been so devastating. It's decimated indigenous peoples of the Americas. So I'm trying to not use that language, but it's really hard to talk about it. But um, what you see here with Henry the Navigator in the mid 1400s, before Christopher Columbus, Europeans, through Portuguese in particular, had already started this expansion stuff. And this is Christian mission was a part of that. And then you get to what defines really the 15th, the last part of the 15th century and all of the 16th century. Christopher Columbus gets commissioned by the monarchy of Spain, and in that commission, he was trying to find a trade route to India, and so he thinks he can go west and run into India, because he has no idea that there are two massive continents to the west. But he takes off. He bumps into what becomes North and South America. Now, the Spanish and the Portuguese kind of fight over the territory. You're like, whose land is this? Since the Spanish monarchy had commissioned Christopher Columbus, of course, they thought all of it was theirs. But the Pope actually makes Pope Alexander VI in 1493, just the year after Columbus runs into the Americas. The Pope makes an edict, and he literally divides the world between Spain and Portugal. And he said from Philippines to the Americas, all of that was Spain. And from Africa all the way to Southeast Asia, that's Portugal's. Not that it was the Pope's land to give away, but that's exactly how they understood it. And so Christian mission then becomes part and parcel of what these monarchies are supposed to do. So they are supposed to go and take this land, evangelize the people who are there, Christianize them, and then they could collect their tithes from those folks, and then divide the new world between them. So the Christopher Columbus's inadvertent finding of the New World for Europe devastated the native population, but it absolutely was part of mission. The Catholic Church, who was really kind of in charge of the theological aspects of these expeditions, these were the ones who missionized the New World. So as the New World is being explored and exploited by European expansion, on the other side of Europe, something else is happening. So just before Christopher Columbus finds the Americas, Constantinople finally falls to Islam. So in 1453, Constantinople fell to the Islamic conquest. And this immaculate church, the Hagia Sophia, this masterpiece of architecture for its time, this incredibly beautiful church. It was the number one church in Constantinople. It was the church of the Byzantine Empire. What St. Peter's is to the Catholic Church is what the Hagia Sophia was to the Eastern Orthodox Church. Well, it was conquered and converted to a mosque in 1453. and Christian Byzantine, its independence was over. Christianity was persecuted in some profound ways at that time. And what happened as that whole region, Turkey, North Africa, becomes Islamic, it essentially isolates the Roman Catholic Church or the Roman Catholic Europe from the Holy Land where Christianity was born. So this kind of Middle Eastern religion, Christianity, this sectarian Jewish movement that becomes Christianity, is completely then locked away from its place of origin. And instead of kind of getting really caught up in that, the Roman Catholic Church would soon seek conquest and conversion in the New World. And so instead of looking towards the Middle East, they would look west in the other direction to the New World, which would only further it from its origins in the Middle East. And this, the fall of Constantinople in 1453, and the exploration of the New World in 1493, this is the beginning of the thoroughly Europeanizing of Christianity. It has lost all of its Middle Eastern roots at this point and is it is a European religion at this point. Now, I say that reluctantly because I think La Manzana's work is very important to us to help us realize that Christianity was still going on. I mean, in spite of Islamic conquest, Christianity was still thriving in Egypt and Ethiopia. There were certain kinds of Christianity still in existence under Islamic rule in the Middle East, even into Asia, and that Christianity didn't stop, but it didn't have the openness or peace to fully thrive like what was happening in Europe. But even as Christianity becomes thoroughly Europeanized with the move towards the West and the New World, something happens internally. The Protestant Reformation happens, and it ruptures Europe within from a Christian standpoint. And this is important because the Reformation has profound implications for the way Christianity is understood in Europe, and as it is transplanted into the New World, it just has a whole different thing. So it's important to kind of pay attention to now because it has to do with it'll have everything to do with missions later on. Within 3 decades after European exploration and conquest of the New World, European Christianity was thrown into chaos by the Protestant Reformation. And for the next 2 centuries, European Christianity would fight within itself, all the while conquering other parts of the world with a missionizing enterprise. So Martin Luther was one of the main figures in the Protestant Reformation, and he basically wanted to reform the Catholic Church because he thought that the church had become corrupt from the inside out, and so he wanted to reform it. This led to the beginning of Lutheranism and Protestantism outright in Europe, and these their wars fought and won and lost around this about what kind of Christianity was right. And in spite of really kind of going to war with Luther and Lutheranism and Protestantism, the Catholic Church in 1563 created the Council of Trent. And it's at the Council of Trent that the Catholic Church created some reforms and basically followed some of Luther's guidelines, but it never gave credit to Luther for it. And it solidified its resistance to reformers like Luther in the Council of Trent, basically condemning Protestants as heresy. but there were so many followers of Protestantism within Europe, whole nation states, whole monarchies shifted. The King of England, at the same time this was going on, Henry VIII declares himself to be the leader of the Church of England, which is a fundamentally different thing than what Luther was doing. But you got the creation of the Church of England, and the Lutheran Church becomes the state church of other monarchies and countries. And so this uniformly transforms what Christianity looks like in Europe and directly affects the way both the Catholic Church and the Protestant versions of church does missions moving forward. This was an unprecedented time in the history of mission. There were so many different fronts that were being fought. The rise of Islam and how that affected Christianity, the polarization of the Latin West and the Greek East, the New World and expansion, circumnavigation of Africa. All that happened in this time period, and Christianity as a proselytizing religion was spread all over the globe at this time. So, if you have any questions, please send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Hope you guys are enjoying these lectures. Peace until I hear from you next time.